Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. An independent United Nations inquiry has concluded that Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. President Trump heads to the UK for an unprecedented second state visit, but protests and the Epstein scandal could overshadow his trip. And the federal court blocks Donald Trump from sacking Lisa Cook. To our top story, a commission established by the United Nations says Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. It is the first time that such an explosive allegation has been made publicly by a UN body. Israel's foreign ministry said it categorically rejects this distorted and false report. For more on this, I'm joined by Fredman, former Israeli strategic affairs official and executive director of the Misgav Institute for National Security. Asha, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Appreciate your time. Israel is bombarding Gaza City as the long-anticipated ground assault does begin. According to Israel's defense minister, Gaza is burning. Footage shows huge queues of Palestinians trying to flee to safety. How does Israel plan to protect innocent civilians and also your own soldiers?
Israel is going far beyond any other military in the West or otherwise in their efforts to enable civilians to leave the combat zone, issuing warnings ahead of time, issuing directives how to reach the safe zones, increasing humanitarian aid greatly into these designated humanitarian zones in the central and southern parts of Gaza. At the same time, Israel is determined to complete the work of defeating the Hamas terrorist organization, which has put its infrastructure under the homes and buildings of Gaza, so that we can get to a day after Hamas in Gaza and allow for the rebuilding of the territory in a way that will be good for the region.
Today, a UN Commission report says Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. To summarize the report to you, it accuses Israel of indiscriminate killing, efforts to stymie the growth of the Palestinian population, and accuses Israel of sexual crimes. Is it time for Israel to tell the world the truth about its actions inside of Gaza and also let international journalists in to see the truth of what is happening?
Let's be absolutely clear. The people on this commission were selected because of their long history of anti-Israel bias and distortions. If you recall, one of the members, Navi Pillay, when she was head of the Human Rights Council, 100 U.S. members of Congress sent a letter to her to decry and protest against her gross bias against the state of Israel. And the same is true. Other members of that committee have said the most sort of primitive anti-Semitic tropes and comments in the past. This report should not be taken seriously. They've relied entirely on information provided by Hamas while ignoring detailed and documented information provided by both the Israeli government and independent authorities, showing that their claims are false. This is just another report in the long history of biased UN reports against Israel. If the UN said tomorrow the world is flat, there would be a commission that issued a detailed report proving that fact.
Okay, so the report says the definition of genocide came from the Geneva Convention. I mentioned the 4 acts above. Do you deny any of these things are actually happening?
Absolutely. Israel is fighting a genocidal terrorist organization that is putting its terrorist infrastructure within a civilian population. Israel, as I said, is going far and beyond what any other military has done in order to target that terrorist organization. It has no intent. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of Hamas using civilians as human shields is that civilians are harmed. But Israel is not attempting to harm Gazan civilians, certainly not attempting to carry out a genocide in any sense of the word. This is, again, a false another one of the UN's many false reports. If the UN said that Israel was looking to turn all of Gazans, I don't want to go into. This is another one of the UN's false reports in a long list, and Israel's fighting terror, it is absolutely not committing genocide.
And I listen to you and you say it's another one of the UN's false reports. Israel's not committing genocide. But for many of the viewers watching the show and also looking at images on social media will see Israel's bombing of Gaza, starving of civilians, and many, many more horrific images. So the fact that denying this is becoming very difficult for people around the world to accept, because basically you're saying that what we're seeing on our TV screens and what people are witnessing on social media is just not real. So what is the answer here? What needs to happen? What needs to change for Israel to stop?
Well, let's be clear. There is certainly widespread destruction in Gaza because, again, Hamas has been widely documented. Hamas has been using Gaza's schools and hospitals and apartment buildings for its terror infrastructure. And therefore, after Israel issues warning to the civilians to depart, it then has been striking these areas, leading to very significant destruction in Gaza. And once Hamas is no longer the dominant power in Gaza, then the rebuilding of Gaza can indeed begin. But as I believe you know, and certainly your viewers should know, for example, again and again and again and again, these pictures of starving children have been shown to be, sadly, very sadly, children with serious diseases, which occurs around the world, and therefore they look terrible. And as a father, I feel terrible when I see those children, but it has nothing to do with starvation. And in fact, Israel has been allowing in thousands of tons of food, baby food, medicine into Gaza. Again, more so than any other military fighting terror. Certainly no other country has brought in this amount of humanitarian aid into an active war zone. There's no starvation in Gaza. Unfortunately, what there is a very sophisticated campaign by Hamas, by Al Jazeera, by other people who support their network to promote these false narratives.
Asha, as Israel begins its ground offensive on Gaza City, can you guarantee that Hamas will actually be there? And are you able to rescue the hostages and bring them back home to their families? Because according to some reports, it's difficult to know, but about 2,000 to 3,000 Hamas combatants are left. And do you know where they are?
Israel has good information regarding Hamas, but that's exactly the point. Meaning, if we ever want to get to a stable future, those Hamas terrorists need to be captured or killed or expelled. Otherwise, we're just going to have repeated rounds of fighting in Gaza. I've served in the IDF. Friends of mine have served in the IDF. None of us want another round of fighting. We would like nothing more than stable, warm relations, the integration of Gaza, for example, into the Abraham Accords. But the only way that's ever going to happen is if we eliminate Hamas as the dominant force on the ground, and that's what Israel is looking to accomplish as we speak.
And yesterday, while in Israel, Marco Rubio called on Qatar to continue to play a constructive role in resolving the Gaza conflict. Is Israel still interested in reaching a ceasefire deal after bombing the Hamas negotiators in Qatar?
Israel has said, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Foreign Minister Saar have said in the most explicit way possible that if Hamas would agree to the American proposal of releasing all the hostages for ending the war, Israel would agree, even though, again, that would mean leaving Hamas in power, which would be disastrous for Gaza, but we would get our hostages back, and that's something that we deeply, deeply want. Hamas hasn't been widely reported. Hamas rejected that offer. They've rejected again and again offers and offers. There's a lot more that Qatar could do to pressure Hamas. Unfortunately, because Qatar is committed to Hamas's survival and to the Muslim brother ideology of Hamas, they have been serving as a mediator, but refraining from putting pressure on Hamas, which could bring a hostage release and an end to the war. And that's just unfortunate.
Asha, as you did mention there, Qatar has been a key mediator in this, and it was very condemned that Israel did hit Hamas leaders inside of Doha, and unexpected by much of the international community. Asha Fredman, I appreciate your time. Thank you. Now, President Donald Trump is expected to arrive in the UK for an unprecedented second state visit. He boarded Air Force One earlier today with the First Lady, Melania Trump, and will land in London later this evening. They will spend the night at Windsor Castle's estate before meeting the King and Queen tomorrow. The US President spoke to reporters before embarking on his journey. Here's what he had to say.
Well, my relationship is very good with the UK, and Charles, as you know, who's now king, is my friend. And it's the first time this has ever happened where somebody was honored twice, so it's a great honor. And this one's at Windsor. They've never used Windsor Castle for this before. They used Buckingham Palace. And I don't want to say one's better than the other, but they say Windsor Castle is the ultimate, right? So it's going to be nice. But basically, I'm there also on trade. They want to see if they can refine the trade deal a little bit. We made a deal, and it's a great deal.
We can now go live to London to speak to Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddy Gray. Freddy, great to have you on the show. We just heard there from President Donald Trump saying King Charles is my friend and an elegant gentleman. He's very excited about staying in Windsor Castle. Very warm, positive words there from Donald Trump. Will this be the theme of the visit, do you think? Freddy, I do apologise. I think Freddy is on a mute at the moment. Freddy, if you could unmute yourself and we'll definitely get back to you. Just waiting there for Freddy Gray from The Spectator to speak to us a little bit about Donald Trump's second visit to the UK. Freddy, have I got you now?
I've turned it back on, sorry, my
That's
fault.
no problem at all, Freddy. I appreciate you turning it back on. Great to have you. So I'm not sure if you heard my question or if you wanted me to repeat it there, but we heard Donald Trump very positive, saying King Charles is my friend, an elegant gentleman, super excited about staying at Windsor Castle. So positive words from President Donald Trump. Do you think this will be the theme of the visit?
I think so. I think the establishments in Washington and Westminster are hoping that, unlike the start of this interview, it all goes without a hitch. But there are a lot of difficult issues floating around in the air. There is the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and, of course, the sacking of Peter Mandelson, the ambassador to the US, last week, which Mandelson had played a key part in organizing this state visit. In fact, he was instrumental in setting it up and arranging the sort of really feast of pomp and grandeur that the British state was going to put on for Donald Trump. So there's that hanging over it. But as you heard from Donald Trump just there, the mood music now is trying to be positive, talking about how much he likes the king. The prime minister will seek to butter him up as much as possible without annoying his own voters, because not all Labour voters are big supporters of Donald Trump. So the big hope it goes without a hitch. But I do remember Donald Trump coming in 2018 to see Theresa May, and he gave an interview. He hasn't done this yet. He'll have to squeeze in an interview very quickly if he is to do it. But he did an interview with the Sun just before the visit, which completely derailed the whole trip, because he said lots of shocking things about Brexit, about immigration in Britain, which rather derailed his visit. That hasn't happened so far. It seems like he's in a more benign mood this time around. We'll just have to wait and see.
So, Freddy, it sounds to me a little bit like what we're going to see from Donald Trump might be different from the first time around. Lessons learned. And the Telegraph is reporting that President Trump is expected to go easy on Starmer because basically he's on the political ropes. And you did mention there the sacking of Lord Mandelson. Do you agree with this? Do you think Trump will take a softer approach with Keir Starmer, someone he sees as a key ally?
I think so. I think he intends to. But the very fact that he feels he needs to go softly is in itself a bit embarrassing for the government. The fact that, people in Washington are saying we all know that he's on the ropes shows just how grave Keir Starmer's political crisis is. And in a way, this trip, if this trip goes well, it could be some much needed positive news for Keir Starmer. But if anything goes wrong, or if any other scandal breaks in the next few days, there's a lot of people here saying that Keir Starmer's one scandal away from resignation. That may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but not that much of an exaggeration.
So It's interesting to say that it's one scandal away, and a lot of the news that we are reading seems to be that Keir Starmer is in hot water over all sorts of things. Mandelson, the immigration situation in the country, an aide having to resign. So is Keir Starmer pretty much on his way out?
Well, it's probably a little bit too soon to say that, but it does feel as though this government is falling apart. Just 2 weeks ago, Keir Starmer announced phase two. He came back from the summer and he announced phase two of his government. And everybody said to that, well, what on earth was phase one? Because you don't seem to have achieved much in phase one. But phase two, he said, was going to be all about delivery. And since he's uttered those words, his party, his government, have had nothing but disaster after disaster. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, had to resign over false claims she made about her property purchases. And then you've had the Mandelson scandal that has bubbled on and on and on. And there's a lot of questions about how much Keir Starmer knew about the nature of Mandelson's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And when was he informed? And at what stage did he decide to defend Mandelson in Parliament last week? So lots and lots of questions hanging over him. And it feels we've got quite used to having governments in crisis at the moment. Since Brexit in 2016, we've had a Tory party that was in government for about 14 years that had a succession of crises. And it feels like Labour are just carrying that on. We seem to have a political class, a Labour Party and a Tory party and a Conservative Party that just seem to go from disaster to disaster. And that is why you're seeing Nigel Farage, of course, Donald Trump's friend, doing so well in the polls with his Reform Party. And a lot of people think he will be the next Prime Minister of Great Britain.
And Freddy, let's just move away a little bit from Starmer's political crisis at home. What will be in focus as Donald Trump and Keir Starmer meet each other? What are the main topics of discussion?
Well, the main one, the big one, is the trade deal. Donald Trump put Britain at the front of the queue for the trade deal with the United States. He seems to like Keir Starmer, much to the surprise of some of his advisors. He seems to have a genuinely good rapport with Keir Starmer. And I suspect thrashing out the details of that trade deal will be part of the discussion. So it won't be anything final yet. We won't have a kind of signed, sealed and delivered agreement. But positive mood music on that, moving the discussions forward, agreeing that we in America agree on the basics of the trade deal. That will be the key part of their discussions. But they will talk about other things too. They will, of course, talk about Ukraine. They will talk about Gaza. And they will also talk, I think, about the nature of immigration and free speech. Free speech is going to be a very, very potentially sore topic. There's a lot of people in the Trump administration, including Vice President J.D. Vance, who really want America to put a lot of pressure on Britain to be less censorious about speech. There's some concern in Trump circles about the fact that the British government is locking people up for things they say on social media, seems to be clamping down on free speech in a way that the American government doesn't agree with at all. And linked to that is the question of the tech companies who, of course, control speech on the internet. And it's very interesting that Trump is coming over with various tech titans, various oligarchs of tech, if you like. Sam Altman, the ChatGPT OpenAI founder, is going to be there. And these tech companies are going to try and apply pressure on the British government to play their way when it comes to speech online. That could be a sore point, and that's one area where things could really spin out of control, and the nice mood music that you're hearing could be interrupted by a row.
And Freddy, how much influence will the soft power of the royal family have on how President Trump does deals with the UK and the talks of more free speech in the country? Because we know that Donald Trump loves the pomp and ceremony. He loves the royal family, and this is a way for him to really indulge in that.
Well, Britain does have an advantage in terms of our dealings with Donald Trump as a person, because his mother was Scottish. She was a big fan of the royal family. He has said repeatedly how much he loves the pomp and the ceremony, as you say. And he clearly is flattered by this second state visit, this unprecedented state visit. But I think we British, we have a tendency to exaggerate how much that matters in terms of the actual conduct of diplomacy, and particularly the conduct of trade relations. Donald Trump may like the royal family. He will like being treated well. Yes, that will give us an advantage in some ways, but it's not going to mean that he's suddenly going to roll over and say, actually, I'll give you everything you want on trade.
Freddy Gray, Deputy Editor of The Spectator. Always brilliant to have your analysis and thoughts. Thank you for joining us. To talk more about the protests to Trump's visit, I'm joined by the Stop Trump Coalition's spokesperson, Seema Saida. Seema, thank you so much for joining us. So what message are you hoping to send to President Donald Trump with these protests? What key issues do you want to raise, and what do you hope to achieve?
Well, firstly, we are horrified by the USA's arming and funding of Israel and their complicity in the genocide in Gaza. So one of the key reasons that we're mobilizing is to protest Trump's complicity in that. And we have the Palestine Solidarity Campaign as a key supporter of the Stop Trump coalition. Secondly, we don't want our government to sell out to the big tech oligarchy, the big tech barons that Trump is bringing with him when he comes to dine at a state banquet in Windsor. We know that there are these trade deals on the table, but to us it seems like much of these deals are about trying to reduce our ability to tax and regulate big tech monopolies, and about allowing these billionaire oligarchs to hoover up wealth and data and exploit ordinary British people and ordinary American people just to get richer and richer, whilst we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis.
Seema, some would argue it's extremely beneficial to have the President of the United States over to secure strategic ties with the US that will actually benefit the UK. And I don't know if you heard Freddy Gray, who was on before you, spoke about the tech oligarchs coming with President Donald Trump and how this could actually be a topic of freedom of speech and how people can get their voices heard, something the UK and the US see differently. And you are a protest movement, so don't you want freedom of speech? Don't you want to be able to say what you can over the internet?
We definitely want freedom of speech, and our government, this Labour government, has been running an authoritarian crackdown on protesters for Palestine. We've seen hundreds of people being arrested just for holding placards opposing the genocide. We've seen Palestine Action, a civil disobedience group, proscribed as a terrorist organization when they use the same tactics that the suffragettes used to allow women to vote. So while Trump talks about freedom of speech, we know that the real people who are cracking down on freedom of speech are Trump himself and our Labour government. And we're here to stand for a new world order where people are equal, where war and genocide are ended, and where white supremacy and Western supremacy no longer rules the roost, where nations are treated as equal.
Over the last week, there's been strong rhetoric from the far right and also from the far left following the death of Charlie Kirk. What are you doing to keep your protest message clear and also peaceful?
Stop Trump coalition mobilized the first time that Donald Trump came to visit us, and our protests were definitely peaceful. They were huge and they were mass, and Trump is running scared of us because he has a big ego and he doesn't like to be humiliated. The violence that we're seeing, the murder of Charlie Kirk as well, is part of the far right's rhetoric of hate and state violence. This weekend, Elon Musk was video linked into a far right rally in London, and he said violence is coming to you and that people should fight or die. Last year in August, there were riots on the street from the far right, people trying to set buildings on fire, people attacking people of color, Muslims, migrants. We are all feeling unsafe because of the far right, and that's the violence that needs to be tackled. And Keir Starmer, by inviting Trump here, the head of global fascism, the head of white supremacy, is legitimizing the violence that Trump is accelerating all around around the globe.
Seema, I would think Donald Trump would strongly disagree with what you just said there. And also, in defense, we have seen some pretty outrageous stuff from the far left on social media after Charlie Kirk's death. So I think that to be balanced, it's not just the far right and it's not just the MAGA movement. I think both the left and the right in these situations need to become closer together. But just really quickly, before I let you go, protests like what you are organising, they cost a huge amount of money for security and policing. Is that something that concerns you, that you're using taxpayers' money?
What costs a huge amount of money is Trump being invited here for an unprecedented second state visit that just wasn't necessary and has not been offered to other world leaders before. This is Keir Starmer who's forced this expenditure on us. And further, it's Trump who should be paying for his own security, not for the people of Britain. We have a right to protest, and that's a fundamental pillar of any democratic society. And if Trump is crying about free speech, then he should be the last person who should be against our right to protest.
Seema Saida, thank you so much for speaking to us. Australia wants minimally invasive age checks under its social media ban that's due to take effect in December. Governments and tech firms are closely monitoring the developments. Australia is the first country in the world to put a ban on teens using social media, as Patrick Falk does report.
With just 3 months to go before Australia's world-first social media ban for teens kicks in, authorities confirmed a lighter touch approach to the looming legislation. But that also means they expect the likes of TikTok, Facebook and other platforms to ensure enforcement.
With the support of the regulatory guidance being published today, there is no excuse for non-compliance. Platforms must take reasonable steps to detect and deactivate underage accounts, to prevent re-registration or circumvention, and to provide an accessible complaints process for their users.
Under the rules, platforms won't need to verify the age of all users or meet any minimum standard for how many teens they boot off. And they won't be told what technology they must use for screening, although the policies do need to be transparent and consistent.
Adults should not see huge changes to the platform, and that's why we put into the regulatory guidance that we think it would be unreasonable if platforms re-verified everyone's age. We want them to focus on the under 16s. We know that they have the targeting technology to do this. They can target us with deadly precision when it comes to advertising. Certainly they can do this around the age of a child.
The platforms are required to satisfy Australia's e-safety watchdog that they're taking reasonable steps to remove accounts of those aged under 16. But there'll be no legally enforceable standard for accuracy. Those who breach the regulations could face fines of up to $33 million. Australia's ban on teens using social media was passed in November last year amid concern about the impact it had on mental health. Some might argue the leeway to make mistakes and scope for teens to skirt the rules means the law lacks the effect it's meant to have. Patrick Falk, Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The first flight to France carrying migrants under the UK's one-in, one-out deal has been postponed at the last minute. Local media reports that migrants were removed from an Air France flight after legal challenges and anti-immigration protests. The UK Justice Minister told Times Radio that deportations will continue as soon as possible. President Donald Trump has said the US military carried out a strike on an alleged Venezuelan drug cartel boat heading to the US. On Truth Social, Trump said that 3 men from narco-terrorist groups were killed in the attack. Tensions between the US and Venezuela escalated after Washington deployed warships to the southern Caribbean as part of counter-narcotics operations. A New York judge has dismissed terrorism charges against Luigi Mangione, who is suspected of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in December 2024. The judge stated the charges were legally insufficient. He also ruled a charge of second-degree murder against Mangione could indeed stand. Mangione has pleaded not guilty. Hollywood actor and Oscar-winning director Robert Redford has died at the age of 89. Redford, who was also one of the founders of the Sundance Film Festival, plus starred in films such as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting. In a career spanning 6 decades, he also won 3 Golden Globe Awards, including the Lifetime Achievement Honor in 1994. An appeals court has blocked the White House from removing Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook from her post, while the courts decide whether Trump can remove her over allegations of mortgage fraud. The court's 2-1 ruling came just hours before the start of the Fed's high-stakes meeting to vote on whether to cut borrowing costs for the first time this year. Meanwhile, President Trump said he'd signed documents to move aide Stephen Moran to the Fed board. Just take a listen.
Signed Stephen Myron's commission. So he is now on the Fed. I'm going to call him in a few minutes from the helicopter. And he's a good man. Most of you know him. He's very talented. He'll have a big influence on this. When too late, getting his rates down, I guess. Who knows? You never know with too late, but he's done a lousy job. The rates should be much lower, much lower. But I've just signed his document and all of the papers, and Steve Myron is now on.
Do you believe the Federal Reserve is an independent body? What do you think about the independence?
Oh, it should be, but I think they should listen to smart people like me. I think I have a better instinct than him. If you look, all the economists got it wrong. I got it right, along with 1 other people out of 100.
For more on this, I'm joined from London by economist Laurie Laird. Thank you so much for joining me. There we are. We just heard from Donald Trump, and it was quite interesting what he said about the Fed staying independent. Hiya. But let's just go on to the Lisa Cook story first. Is this ruling a blow for President Trump and a win for the Fed, as Lisa Cook can now stay in place for this policy meeting, which of course starts today?
It's a bit of a blow for the White House. The White House has really been trying to force Lisa Cook out of the governing body of the Fed. This case will go on. This was just a sort of a sequential or incremental ruling. And again, she was only upheld by a 2-1 margin. And the reason that her position was upheld was not because there was no ruling on whether she did anything wrong or not. She was accused of mortgage fraud. There's been some documentation out over the past week or so that throws some questions over that allegation. But it came down to due process. This appeals court said that she was not provided the opportunity to defend herself. Due process did not happen. So Lisa Cook, for the moment, is a voting member of the Federal Reserve Board. But this case has not been finished yet. I think if we go back very briefly to Stephen Myron, and Donald Trump spoke about his handpicked appointment to the Federal Reserve governing body just before he got on Marine One. And he said he was going to ring Stephen Myron from the helicopter, which really throws up some questions about this person's independence when setting monetary policy. The other question that many people have over Stephen Myron is he's taking a leave of absence from his White House job to sit on the Fed governing body, at least at the moment, for a short period of time. He intends to go back to the White House, which raises questions in a lot of people's minds about how independent he will be if he's hoping to go back to the White House.
Yeah, there's lots of questions, as we did say, about the independence of the Federal Reserve. But another big question is, will the Fed cut rates on Wednesday? We know the central bank hasn't cut this year. And to say the least, Donald Trump has been super frustrated over this.
Your frustration probably doesn't begin to describe his dissatisfaction with Jerome Powell. I think that a quarter point reduction is probably in the cards. And Jerome Powell, who's the head of the governor's, head of the FOMC, which is the vote-setting body, and the object of Donald Trump's ire, really teed up a rate cut last month with a keynote speech that he gave. I think the big question is what happens after that? Because one of the things that Powell said is that he thinks that rates right now are only moderately restrictive. That suggests that rates don't have that much further to fall, certainly not the full 3 percentage points that Donald Trump has said he wanted to see. Throw into the decision-making process, inflation in the U.S. hasn't gone away. It's going in the wrong direction, heading toward 3% at an annual rate. The Fed's goal, the Fed's target is a 2% inflation rate. That's a pretty big gap. You also look at consumer spending, which is about 2/3 of the U.S. economy, such an important part of the U.S. economy. If you use retail sales as a proxy for consumer spending, retail sales rose quite a bit in the month of August, not 0.6%. That isn't adjusted for inflation, that number, but it's still a healthy rise, more than economists expected. So it suggests that the consumer is still alive and well, even though there is evidence that labor growth is slowing quite a bit.
That's really interesting. So it could be one and done for the Fed, which I'm sure will frustrate
Quite
Donald
possibly.
Trump even more. But,
yeah, wait for that.
Yeah, then, we'll have to definitely have a conversation on that day. But let's also just move on to something slightly different because Google is set to invest a huge amount of money, $6.8 billion, in the UK's artificial intelligence. And I find this really interesting because when we hear about these big sums of money, Laurie, I always wonder, how will this money be used and how will it translate? Will more jobs be created? Do we know what those jobs possibly are?
Well, I always, those are really good questions. I always wonder, will this money materialize in the first instance? And we've seen going the other way, we've seen so many foreign corporations pledging money, investment money in the U.S. And you wonder, gosh, can this money really come? So we sort of believe we'll see that large sum when it actually materializes. Google has said that it might create as many as 7,000 jobs, which is really a big chunk of jobs. And Leigh-Ann, there could be a lot more where that came from. The U.S. delegation is coming with Jensen Huang, who is the head of NVIDIA, the big chip maker, Satya Nadella, the head of Microsoft. So there's the suggestion that there may be more pledges, at least, of investment to come. So I think there'll be victory laps around Downing Street at the outcome of these sorts of talks, particularly because, well, a lot of tech companies believe that the UK has the technical prowess, it has the education system, it has the people who can take these jobs. One of the big turnoffs about the UK is that energy costs here are so very high, 50% higher than in Europe, more than double what you see in the US. And so that's been a real turnoff for investing in this very energy intensive business in the UK. So I think there will be lots of excitement in Whitehall, in the center of government, about this announcement.
Lots of excitement, but let's see if that money materializes, like you did say. And finally, we're going to go to another topic. India and the US are holding a day of trade talks. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about this in the past. Do you think there'll be a breakthrough in the stalled negotiations on a trade deal between the two countries?
With great respect to both sides of this trade deal, no, Leigh-Ann, I don't see much coming out of this. The U.S. delegation in India is led by a pretty junior person who I don't think will have the authority to negotiate very much. It's nice to see that the rhetoric has softened a little bit. There were so many negative things said about India being a dead economy. But I think one of the things that the U.S. wants to see out of India is an opening up of the agricultural market. Donald Trump would love to send a lot more farm products to India. And India has a long history of protecting its farmers. More than 40% of the population or more than 40% of the workforce works in agriculture. So getting India to pry open those agricultural markets will be a real challenge.
Yeah, and we've heard Narendra Modi saying that's something he isn't keen to do. Laurie Laird, I always love speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your insights. A reminder of our top stories. An independent United Nations inquiry has concluded that Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. President Trump is set to arrive in the UK for an unprecedented second state visit, but protests and the Epstein scandal overshadow his trip. And the federal court blocks Trump from sacking Lisa Cook. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. We'll be back in just a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.